Match hands. You want right hand on the ear.
Yes.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. When I first planned this out, I imagined that I would start off this video by saying something like, now that everyone's out back bouldering again, but looking out of my window from Leeds this past week and a bit, I don't think many people have been out bouldering lately. We've had some pretty miserable weather, but that said, it did give me time to sit down and finally record this video. So a little while back I filmed an indoor bouldering, beginners bouldering advice and tips video, and you guys seem to really like that, so I thought that I would film a outdoor specific one.
Rocking it, rocking it, rocking it.
This is aimed a little more towards beginners, so maybe you've never climbed outside before, or maybe you've only climbed outside a handful of times, or maybe you've been climbing outside for years and you're just interested in my beginner's advice. So I guess I will start with a list of things that you will need if you're hoping to head out outdoor bouldering soon. So you will need a bouldering pad, bouldering shoes and some optional boot bananas to keep your feet fresh, a chalk bag and some chalk to go in it, a guidebook, a roll of climbing tape, a natural fibre brush, your phone so that you can contact others or the emergency services if you have to, a water bottle, snacks and maybe a caffeinated beverage, a square of carpet or towel to avoid transferring dirt and grain onto the rock, and something to take away your rubbish with. So now that you've got everything you need for outdoor bouldering, what now? So this is by no means an exhaustive list, but here are some of my tips and some advice for beginning to boulder outdoors. So first, bouldering outside is a little different to climbing in a gym. Well actually it's very different to climbing in a gym. One of the obvious differences between indoor and outdoor climbing is that outside you don't have the luxury of a padded landing, so you're going to want some bouldering pads or crash pads, and be prepared to answer some quite funny questions about what the thing on your back is. We still get asked all the time. I do remember one dog walker asking me if I had a parachute on my back one time, but those conversations are always good when you tell them that you're climbing, and usually middle-aged women get very concerned about you if you tell them that you're bouldering. It's a crash pad. And you don't really need more than one to start out. We have accumulated quite a few over time, but if you are just starting out and you're not planning on climbing especially high or especially kind of sketchy stuff with dodgy landings, then you're likely to be okay with just the one. But obviously the more you have, the more surface area you're covered, and yeah. I personally recommend going for a pad with a larger surface area, so a single pad with more surface area, to avoid stacking pads. And the reason that I say this is that on the two occasions that I have either had or witnessed bad ankle injuries at the crag, it's been due to mat placement and stacking pads. And that brings me to spotting. So you're going to want to spot your partner, or you're going to want to ask your partner or your partners to spot you whilst you're climbing. And spotting is effectively controlling somebody's fall. So the way I see it, the aim of spotting is not to try and catch the person falling, but to make sure that they're falling in a somewhat more controlled way than they would if you weren't spotting them. So they're not going to hit their head on a rock or land off the pad. Effective spotting can be the difference between a safe landing and a quite nasty injury. So even though it might feel a little bit strange to stand there with your arms up and your friend who's climbing, it's definitely worth doing and it's good practice. So now I want to rewind a little, and that's going to throw my timeline off kilter, but I want to talk a little bit first about crag access and considerations. So before you head out climbing, it is wise to scope out the area that you're hoping to head to and figure out if there is anything that you need to know beforehand before you go. So any access considerations or just things that you need to know before you get there. So in Yorkshire, where we climb, there are often nesting bird restrictions, or there are restrictions on moorland venues in grouse shooting season. So it's always worth just checking before you head off to a crag that there aren't any issues or reasons why you might not want to visit the crag that day. There's a crag nearby to us which is on privately owned land, and the owner of that land has asked that people don't climb after dark with lamps. So there can be some quite complex advice on local ethics and access issues, and sticking to these rules ensures that the relationship between landowners and farmers and climbers remains a good one, and we can all carry on climbing in the places that we love to climb. Also, as an aside about access and approach, you'll want a good pair of approach shoes. So crags can be in remote locations that require sometimes treacherous walks in. Also, be prepared for long walks in, so maybe take some snacks and make sure you've got good shoes and water, and yeah, be prepared to be out for a while. Sometimes if you're going to more remote areas, then yeah, be prepared for that. So with that, I'd also say research the crag that you're going to ahead of time. Yes, for access, but also just to scope out the kinds of problems that are there and get a little bit of a kind of wish list together. Perhaps there's a really cool video that you've seen online of someone doing a problem and you want to go and try that. In the UK, we have a website called UKC where people log their climbs, and we also like to use 27 crags to research areas before we go. And also they're really great resources for logging the climbs that you have done and seeing your progress over time. If that is something that you are interested in doing, then I would recommend 27 crags. And in the UK, if you're UK based, UKC. With that, I would also say invest in a guidebook of the area. So in Yorkshire, we have Yorkshire Grip Volume 1 and 2, which are just behind me. And those cover a lot of the areas nearby to us, and they're really informative. It's really useful having guidebooks, sometimes for things like figuring out where the start holds are, or figuring out if there are any holds eliminated, or the sequence of the climb. And guidebooks are also good because obviously they detail the difficulties of the climb, so you know the name and the difficulty of the climb that you are climbing. So now I've covered access and researching the crag before you go. Now for the actual climbing. So what I would say about outdoor bouldering, and what I said in my from Tumblr guide as well, is expect it to feel hard. Climbing outside requires a very different set of skills and techniques than climbing inside can. If you've ever climbed on Yorkshire Grit, you'll know that footwork becomes very important, and learning how to smear and balance on teeny tiny feet, that will pay dividends. But yes, outside, the transition to outside from indoors is a little bit of a shock to the system. Expect your grade to go down a little bit. Try not to take that too hard. It's completely normal for outside to feel very baffling when you first try it, but you do get used to the movement, you get used to the type of climbing, you get used to the technique, and it does begin to feel easier. But yeah, just be aware that climbing outside is a little bit more difficult than climbing inside. Also, I think you have the psychological effect of being in a harsher environment than in the indoor gym. Like if you fall, you're gonna fall on harder ground. You don't have safety mats around you. Like, I think psychologically that can definitely factor in. Another piece of advice I would give for outdoor bouldering is to take grades with a pinch of salt. So I think I said this in my indoor bouldering tips for beginners video, or like the 5 things that I wish I knew when I started climbing. And that is to not get too wrapped up in grades and to take grades with a pinch of salt, and that probably applies more to outside than it does to inside even, I would say. The given grade of a climb is the opinion of the first ascensionist, and whilst they may be very experienced climbers and their best estimate is really well informed, bouldering problems outdoors are always going to feel different for everybody and every body, if that makes sense. My next tip, again, I put in my font video because font is notorious for hard top outs, but for outdoor climbing, you're going to be doing something that maybe you haven't ever done before in the gym, and that is topping out. So once you've climbed a problem, you have to top out over the boulder. Technically, it's a little bit of a different movement and it requires a little bit of a knack. There is a technique to the mantle or the top out. So my advice for topping out and for climbing outside in general, actually, this is another tip, is to start slow. So just take it slowly. Like, don't expect that you will get the hang of it immediately. It does take a little bit of practice, a little bit of time, but it does come. Just take it slowly and build on it, and you will grow more confident, your top outs will improve, and yeah. One that kind of comes hand in hand with the top out is the down climb. So obviously once you top out a boulder, you have to get down off the boulder, and there have been a few occasions. Actually, Nathan a few years ago sprained his ankle really badly because he had to jump down from the top of a boulder which he hadn't checked the top out on. Usually there obviously will be a way to get down off the boulder, but you just might want to be aware that it might not be easy. Sometimes I personally find top outs almost harder than the climb. I often make the really bad joke that I've gotten the grade in the down climb, but it definitely pays to check that you are going to be comfortable and able to get down off the boulder before you commit to going over the top of it. Another tip that I have for any kind of bouldering, indoor and outdoor, is to not be afraid to try boulder problems that are harder than your grade, especially outdoors, because the grading is, in my opinion, a lot more subjective outside because it's not set artificially, it just exists as a boulder problem. Personal style and personal strengths comes into play a lot outside, I find. So if there's something that is beyond your grade on paper, give it a go. If it looks like your kind of thing, maybe it just suits you really well and it's exactly your kind of problem. So don't be afraid to try things that are beyond your grade. Whilst I said to take things slow and to ease yourself in, and yes, I don't recommend jumping in completely at the deep end, once you've started to build your confidence a little bit, try the stuff that is too hard for you because you might surprise yourself. Another piece of advice that I have is that bouldering outside is very conditions dependent. So obviously in the gym you're in quite a controlled environment, you're not at the mercy of things like the weather or humidity, whereas outside the rock is subject to those conditions. For example, if the rock is wet, then it's obviously not climbable, and I'll talk a little bit more about climbing on wet rock in a minute. But yeah, bouldering outside is very conditions dependent. So if you're getting frustrated because you feel like you're kind of sliming off everything, you can't get purchase on anything, it might be just because the conditions aren't good for it. My friends and family always think I'm crazy for getting excited in the wintertime and going outside climbing in the wintertime, but actually the cold weather is a lot better for friction. So that is why boulderers get very excited when winter grit season rolls around and it's dry and crisp. Yeah. So I mentioned just previously about climbing on wet rock, and I want to talk a little bit about general respect for the rock and the areas that we climb in. I read an article which put it really nicely, and it was if they could sum everything up about respecting the rock in a single line of advice, it would be to leave the rock and the area in a better condition, or the same condition at least that you found it in, with as little or no evidence of climbers having been there. There's kind of like a few main points which I think I will reel off. Don't leave rubbish, don't climb when it's wet, try not to overdo it with chalk or mark rocks with chalk, and similarly clean off your roots once you're finished, and don't leave a trace of you having been there. So take away all of your tape or your wrappers and toilet paper. Don't overbrush, and on very soft sandstone try not to brush at all because it damages the rock. So I'm sure that there are many more tips and pieces of advice that I could give. I could probably make a second part to this video, just as I could make a second part to the indoor bouldering version, but that is all for my tips for now. If you are new to outdoor bouldering or you're thinking about heading out, I hope that you are enjoying it, or that you enjoy it. Outdoor bouldering is definitely unique in that it takes you to some amazing places to do a really amazing sport, and yeah, it's a very enjoyable hobby that you are finding or have found. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any more pieces of advice or your own tips or things that I have missed, then leave them below and hopefully people will see them in the comment section. And other than that, I hope you all have a great week, and I'll see you in my next video.